Most people don't realize you played 111 episodes as Detective Mike Logan on Law and Order. Why, Lord? There's been crime shows before or after. There were a dime a dozen. However, Law and Order is like the Energizer Bunny. It keeps going and going.
But
what's the magic of Law and Order?
The idea of procedural. The idea of you start here and you go through it and you end here and it's a neat button and it wraps it up. I mean, I frankly, I'm so tired of the procedural. I think it's sort of like done and over. We've done it a million times, and every one of these things, CSIs and all the Law and Orders and NCISs and all the other ones are the same thing. I'm frankly, but I don't think that's what Law and Order was when it first started. The first few years of Law and Order were, if you look at them, and they're so old now, 1990, it was an all-male cast. It was Michael Moriarty, George Zunzer, Richard Brooks, myself, Stephen Hill, and Diane Florrick. And we shot out of a real precinct, and the whole city was different. You can't even, if you were to do a movie about that particular time, now you couldn't, because it's all, you know, it's like a pinball machine in Times Square. There's none of that character left in the city at all, anywhere. And there still was there, but it was it was trying to find a real reality in the inner workings of the police and in the inner workings of the court, different from what The Good Wife is doing, but in the New York City experience, the New York City character, because a New York detective is different from any other detective in this country. And I went and hung out with the guys in the 3-4, where there was a huge crack epidemic and there were so many homicides going on in the early 90s. And actually Jerry Giorgio, who was in the papers recently, because he's the guy, I don't know if you've been reading about, who was on the case of Baby Hope. And he was talking to me about it when I was hanging out with him, about this container they found on the West Side Highway, and they still haven't been able to find the guy. That was 1990 when he told me about that, and that was still an open case. And a funny story about that is that we were up in I saw some pretty fearsomely horrific things. I mean, literally stepping over bodies in some of the projects, because the crack epidemic had just destroyed. I mean, they were, killing people and setting them on fire on tops of buildings. They used to have names for that, crispy critters. I mean, there's kind of a dark humor with guns. But there was that kind of homicide happening. But I remember once we were like, and I was really like so into it. It could have been a better character than a New York detective. The problem was I was hanging out with the real guys, and what they were saying and their behavior was so much better than the stuff they were writing out in Hollywood for the show, that I get the script, and even though people thought Law and Order was great, I was going, oh, please. Because these guys naturally just had this. They just had it. But I remember I was out with Giorgio one day, and they were interviewing some people and just talking to guys on the street to get some information or something. And some really wacky people. And I was all, kind of like in my method thing of like, I'm with them, I'm not going to, and so I'm like asking the guy a question, some crackhead guy. And he looks at Jerry, and Jerry, all the New York detectives love to dress really well, the cufflinks, the rings, the New York City detective ring with diamonds. And Jerry was a really well put together guy and everything. And the suits, a lot of them, he wasn't too ostentatious, but a lot of them are. There's a lot of them like to really make that suit look good. And the guy looked at Jerry and said, oh, shit, I know you are, man. You're an actor. Jerry's like, you see many actors with these? He's got his piece here. And the guy goes, oh shit, we all got that, man. But that New York is kind of gone. I thought weren't just about, murder she wrote kind of stories with the rich playboy who kills the whatever. They actually tried to take in what was happening in the day with racism, abortion, issues of real New York issues. A lot of them ripped from the headlines. And I remember one about mushrooms, the kid who shoots through the door the wrong person because he can't even read, and I think Moriarty was just brilliant. And so I think they really captured a moment in New York, and that that New York sensibility. And then it evolved. They realized they had something where they could, you know, the dun-dun, and they condensed it, and they made it into a format, and they never then, they never lost that format. They didn't, at the beginning we were always experimenting, and then they said, well, no, it's going to be a oneer the first 5 minutes, it's going to, or the first minute with the detectives, and then it's going to end up with a wisecrack like Jerry, you know, good old Jerry would end it before the commercial going, well, I guess this guy, you know, whatever, you know, would say something, a wisecrack, and then they move on till they got then to the courts, and then the whole thing was resolved.